What's up? Welcome back to Beyond the Box Score. I've got my guy Ryan Heath on with me again today. We are talking through the wide receiver position. If you have not caught the other episodes, this is part 4 of a series we've done here where we look at what matters at each position in terms of future fantasy football scoring and production in terms of the stats. And so we're digging into wide receiver today. We're going to talk about a lot of really interesting names. Emeka Egbuka, really excited to get to that conversation. McConkey, Jordan Addison, DJ Moore, Brian Thomas Jr., Matthew Golden, Xavier Worthy, Quentin Johnson. We got a lot. We got a lot to talk about. Of course, wide receiver is the deepest position, so there is a lot to talk about. But first, I want to throw it to my guy, Ryan. He's been digging into what matters, and so here it is. If you're watching on the screen on YouTube, it's correlation of wide receiver stats with next season's fantasy points per game. You see receiving yards at the very top. You see some pretty high correlations here. If you've tuned in for each of these 4 episodes, then, like at QB, I think we were coming in with like 0.5 as basically the top correlations at the quarterback position. And we've got like tons of stats that score better than that at wide receiver. So, Ryan, what have you found when digging into the wide receiver position, and how you doing today, man?
Hey, yeah, I'm doing great. Big apologies for the tank top, but it is extremely hot here in the northeastern United States. So trying to stay cool, trying to make sure I can do a full show for you guys today without fainting. But yeah, in terms of wide receiver stats, I'd say there are some similar themes at the wide receiver position compared to the running backs and the tight ends, for example. That being that, yeah, one of the most predictive things is always going to be past fantasy production. So you can see total fantasy points per game in the previous season ranking very highly here. Receiving yards, obviously very related to those things. Same with receptions. Just, yeah, past production, as always, going to be one of our best signals. But yeah, as you move down here, we start to see some of like the target market share stats. Receiving yards market share is going to be a bit lower, but that's kind of similar for tight ends, where, yeah, just these market share stats are useful. It's good to know the wide receivers that are commanding the largest shares of their passing games. That is predictive, of course, because targets are earned. Good receivers are usually earning more targets and higher shares of them and of their production. And then the thing that should stick out at wide receiver compared to tight end, or especially running back, is that our per route efficiency stats are actually pretty decent. They're not that far behind a lot of these production stats. We have first downs per route run, yards per route run, right there at about 0.65, 0.64. That's pretty strong, especially compared to running backs. So at wide receiver, efficiency, at least per route efficiency, is much more predictive. It's like genuinely worth talking about a guy's yards per route run or first downs per route run. We're probably going to dig more into that later, but probably the last thing I wanted to point out, aside from stuff that just isn't really predictive, is these horizontally breaking routes at the bottom. So what you're seeing here is just the total number of horizontally breaking routes. For those unaware, a horizontally breaking route it's not a horizontal route, it's the break of the route is horizontal. So like an in route, an out route, that type of thing, as opposed to just a go route where they're running straight down the field the entire time, right? We'll dig into those more later, but those are, spoiler alert, those are some of the most effective, most efficient routes, at least from a fantasy perspective, that your receiver can be running. So it's legitimately pretty cool that horizontally breaking routes are more predictive of fantasy points than just total routes overall. That's like very rare for really any type of stat that you can take like 30 to 40% of a player's routes and have just that portion be more predictive than the whole. That's like just a very rare thing in statistics, in football statistics. Like anytime that happens, I like raise an eyebrow a little bit and like will want to dig into it. So we'll be doing that some here today. But yeah, aside from that, really, I think the stuff that's the most overrated at wide receiver is anything that's per target or per reception, you just really want to avoid putting a good thing in the denominator of a stat. You don't want to divide by a good thing, divide by targets, divide by receptions, because when you do that, you're just controlling away a player's ability to actually earn volume, which we do not want to do. We want to distinguish between players that do and don't earn volume. That's why per route stats are much better, are much more predictive in general. But yeah, anything else that you wanted to highlight or point out here, Jacob?
No, that's all good stuff. I think it's interesting to compare the correlations here with the tight end position that we did on last week's episode. So what stood out to me is first downs are more important at wide receiver, it seems. I'm curious if you had any thoughts on that, like first downs compared to yards. So yard per route run rate has been thought of as kind of like the holy grail stat for receivers for a while now. And I think first down per route run rate, you've done a lot of research on that over the past couple of years for sure, is proven to be a little bit more predictive. But at tight end, that wasn't the case, right? It was yard per route run was the best per route metric we had.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think we talked about this a little on the tight end episode, but yeah, to kind of like tie this up in a neat bow. To me, the reason for that is the differences between yards per route run and first downs per route run are subtle. They are highly correlated stats, right? But the biggest difference is yards per route run is going to more reward like the big play, the downfield, like field stretcher type of receiver that maybe isn't super consistently moving the chains, but at least in the aggregate is creating big plays and yeah, just building more overall yardage. Whereas first downs per route run is like you can only get one first down on a play, whether it's a 50-yard reception or a 10-yard reception. It's only one first down. So first downs per route run is going to be much more rewarding the consistent receivers, like the actual engines of an offense. I think comparatively, at wide receiver, where the receiving volume is just higher in general than it is for tight ends at the tight end position, you want those guys, especially in PPR scoring, that are going to be getting a lot of receptions, a lot of targets, and first downs per route run is probably a little bit more attuned just to that type of receiver. Whereas for tight ends, there are so few of them that are fantasy relevant. There are so few of them that are actually efficient, that are creating like big plays, that it's honestly enough for a tight end to break off 150-yard touchdown and have that make their entire fantasy day and probably be a top 3 or a top 5 scorer at the position just off of that, right? So the big playability is a little bit more desirable at tight end. So I think it makes sense that yards per route run is superior to first downs per route run there, and vice versa at wide receiver. So maybe that was a little long-winded. Hopefully people understand what I'm getting at there. Overall, just use either one of them. It's interesting to compare those two stats between a specific receiver, but you're going to get like 90% of the information if you just pick one of the two.
Yeah, they're both good. And I think that's a good summation there for people about the two stats. I wanted to dig into a few receivers who stood out to me in terms of having just bad metrics across the board, or a couple of them having specifically bad first down production, and get your thoughts on that. I think the first thing I would say is, like, if you want to bet on one of these players that we're about to dig into, I think you really need to have strong conviction in whatever reasoning you have to believe that you're right, because like Ryan's research shows, the more than any of the positions that we've dug into, wide receiver, the metrics from the previous season have been predictive. And so like I'm concerned about a number of these receivers, and that's because their metrics were bad last year. Even though we can tell ourselves why Lad McConkey's metrics are bad, it still does bother me just a little bit. And I don't want to get too caught on that. So that's why I'm excited for this episode to dig into all these individually with you. But yeah, let's just start with, so the players who come to mind for me who have really bad metrics are DJ Moore, Brian Thomas Jr., Matthew Golden, Xavier Worthy, and Quentin Johnston. And people are getting excited about each of these, I think, as like bounce back players for one reason or another. I wanted to just throw that group of 5 to you first. I'm going to put some of the data on the screen from fantasy points while we talk about these guys. But if anyone from that group of 5 stands out to you, I'm curious if you are betting on any of them, DJ Moore, BTJ, Golden, Worthy, or QJ, or if you're just kind of like, there's lots of receivers I like. I'm kind of out on these guys.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at on all 5 of those guys. I like the closest one in terms of might I be interested, could I talk myself into it, would be BTJ, and that's mostly going to be on the basis of, well, his per route data as a rookie was really good. Like, I think you can make that argument for a BTJ. But ultimately, like with how the Jaguars offense turned out and how BTJ's route profile shifted from like the end of his rookie season to the start of 2025 to the end of 2025, where he's just running more and more go routes straight down the field, a lot fewer of the horizontally breaking routes, just having like a lower value, lower consistency role for fantasy football. I'm just kind of out on him and thinking that his like year 2 metrics are closer to the truth than the year 1 metrics, at least with just how I'm kind of gaming out and imagining the Jaguars offense this year, just with the additions they've made, Jacoby Myers, Parker Washington, the things that have kind of like made that a reality for BTJ last year. They're all just still there pretty much. But yeah, the rest of the names you mentioned, DJ Moore, I just have no interest in. I've kind of thought he was on the border of washed for a year or 2 now. And yes, it's true. The per route data has not really been good recently. I don't think
Awful.
just going
it was
Josh
really
Allen
bad.
saves it. But yeah,
it was really bad at times during the Justin Fields era, even though Moore was producing really well. This is something we dug into with Ben Gretsch recently, and Jacob Sanderson is like, you can contextualize per route data in a number of ways. You don't have to overreact to it. And so like when he's playing with Justin Fields, the stat that Sanderson gave was like conversion rate on dropbacks, where what percentage of these dropbacks actually resulted in a play where a receiver even could have been targeted. And so that's affected by sacks, that's affected by scrambles. Fields does a ton of both of those. And then in 2024, kind of the same thing with Caleb Williams. And so that's back-to-back years where DJ Moore, like, I think was kind of unfairly viewed through this lens of the per route data. What's the excuse for last year? Last year, like, the per route data was pretty dang good in Chicago for basically everybody. And DJ Moore's is truly awful. And so, like, I feel like there's reasons to be excited about, the fit in Buffalo and everything. But I don't really know where we're at from a talent standpoint.
Yeah, I would largely just agree. And you make a good point there that comparing per route data like within a team context can be really helpful because the quarterback and their tendencies, if they scramble a bunch, if they're just a bad quarterback, if it's just like a bad and inefficient and poorly designed offense, all of these things can affect the per route data. But it's within the context where the other players on the team much more efficient than a DJ Moore, for example, where we have some insane efficiency splits with Luther Burden, with Colston Loveland, with all of these Bears. So I think it makes a lot of sense to kind of look at that 1.3 yards per route run from DJ Moore sideways compared to what the other wide receivers were able to do on this team. That's like a point where I would say, okay, this is probably very meaningful and we should probably listen to it, just with all of that extra information added.
First down per route run rate, it's Luther Burden's was double DJ Moore's, and it's 0.10 for Rome Odunze compared to 0.063 for DJ Moore. First read target rate was really low. Like, all these stats that matter in terms of predicting future fantasy scoring are just pretty brutal for Moore. I don't see really hardly anyone in the range where he falls. If you look at last year's per route data, that gets drafted as high as he does. And so I just wanted to bring that up because I don't know. It's like people don't care. Don't talk about what happened last year. You know what I mean? I don't know what it is exactly. Like, people freak out about the AJ Brown data, and it's like AJ Brown's data was so much better than DJ Moore's, and he had a reported injury. Am I missing something here? Like, what?
Yeah.
Andy played in a terrible offensive environment, whereas DJ Moore played for freaking Ben Johnson. Like, I don't understand this at all. And I know AJ Brown goes early in drafts, but it's like people are like, is AJ Brown, has he lost a step or whatever? And it's like, I don't feel like we get the the basis for that is like his production, his efficiency stuff, right? AJ Brown's. And I just don't feel like we get the same concerns with DJ Moore, really. I don't know.
I haven't clicked DJ Moore a single time this entire offseason. I have zero interest in DJ Moore this year. It is literally just the Josh Allen of it all that I think some people buying in again. But yeah, that's definitely not me.
See, I actually do have some interest. Okay. I think it could be a good fit here, but I just looking at what we've had recently from him, I'm just like, oh man, does he just suck? The thing is, like, I've been a huge DJ Moore believer all throughout his career, and he's like never had a good situation until kind of recently. But you could still kind of pick nits with the QB play in Chicago even last year. And it also, whatever was going on there with DJ Moore, he didn't seem very happy. And now he finally, it seems like, has arrived in a place where it could be exactly what he wants. And he's with Josh Allen. And I'm like, I feel like it could turn around and maybe none of this matters. But the data is so bad. I don't know. I want to dig into it more and see if there's hardly any examples of a receiver being this unproductive and then changing that in his age 29 season. Okay. Before we get to our first break, do you have any thoughts on Matthew Golden, Xavier Worthy, Quentin Johnston? I feel like they're kind of the Spider-Man thing here happening. People are obviously the most excited about the Chargers offense, but I think each of those three offenses could potentially produce better than we saw last year. Any thoughts on those three?
I'll say on Golden that you basically can't find any good per route data from him at any point in his post high school career. I have not looked at Matthew Golden's high school stats. Hand up, I have not ever investigated those. But yeah, just throughout his college career, he was never a great per route player. As a rookie, he was a poor per route player. I don't know why we expect that to massively change. And again, this is another offense where it's there are some crazy per route numbers coming out of the Packers, not only last year, but the past handful of years. This is a good offense to be in per route wise. And yeah, Matthew Golden just wasn't it. And yeah, I'd say similar about Xavier Worthy. You got to go back to his freshman year, I think, to find a genuinely good per route outcome for him. Yeah, Quentin Johnston basically never. All of the Chargers had fairly poor per route data last year, as we're probably going to get into with Ladd. So I think for him, you could more tell the story of he's kind of gotten better as a football player every year. Maybe there's some genuine progression going on. And the Chargers data is just kind of weird from last year for a number of reasons we'll get into. So if you're talking me into one of those three, it's probably QJ, but he's also the most expensive of those three by far right now, if I'm not mistaken. So it's kind of whatever.
Yeah, the QJ numbers are slightly better than those guys. I mean, Xavier Worthy's data is so brutal last year. But he is, like you said, the most expensive for sure. Yeah, let's hit our first break. I really want to have this Ladd McConkey conversation, and it might be a doozy. We might be stuck on that one for 10 or 15 minutes. So let's hit our first break, and we'll get right back. We'll talk about the Chargers.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ hits every highlight from all the sports that matter to you.
JJ, we appreciate your time breaking it down.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
With the plays you missed.
What a finish at the final round of play.
And analysis to give you an edge.
All we need is 20 points.
I was shaking in my boots.
Texas, Ohio State, who wins this game?
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
CBS Sports HQ, streaming free 24/7.
All right, so I didn't quite. I'm in the show sheet here, and I'm realizing I didn't quite finish this game that I had set up here that was going to make Ryan want to leave the show immediately. But it was where does Ladd McConkey rank among this group? And it's Marvin Harrison Jr., Quentin Johnston, Matthew Golden, and Xavier Worthy, and he's right in the middle in all of them, basically behind MHJ and QJ in all of the per route data, which is terrifying, of course. Just some other one-offs here that I have that will just probably irritate Ryan. I tried to find, if you think any of these are totally unfair in terms of the way that their offense boosts per route production or anything like that, let me know. But Jaden Higgins and Jalen Knoll had better per route data across the board than Ladd McConkey last year with a lower target per route run rate. Calvin Ridley, over the past 2 seasons, has a higher yard per route run rate than Lad McConkey and is just behind him in first down per route run, which is crazy. He's been on the Titans. A couple players that have higher first down per route run rates than Lad McConkey over the past 2 seasons. Jacoby Myers, with the bulk of that production coming on the Raiders. Josh Downs, not even close. Jaylen Waddle with the Dolphins. Cortland Sutton, Keenan Allen, Chris Godwin. Those guys are fine. Those veterans are pretty good real-life players. But I just think the respect that McConkey gets, like for his game, people would have thought that he would be above all of them. Trey Harris had a higher first down per route run rate than Lad McConkey last year in the same offense. And so I just wanted to get you fired up there with that, get you irritated a little bit. Because what I don't know what to make of this. Like, Lad is clearly nuts as a talent. I've ranted and raved about him, so I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here a little bit. But I guess the question might be from this, the first down per route run rate, the kind of low target rates in college and stuff, is like, is this an offensive engine type of a receiver? If he's going to maybe make the Lad or the Jackson Smith-Njigba type of leap in year 3, is that what we need? Is he that type of a player for real or not? I think we saw signs of that. We saw flashes of that late in his rookie season. But yeah, the per route data is not great across the board over 2 years now, because last year was so bad. Particularly the first down per route run rates are a little bit troubling. The yard per route run rates are pretty good, but the first down rates are a little low.
Yeah. So I'll just kind of take all of that, and I'll just start with like the data that's on the screen in front of us right now. So yeah, as you can see, Lad McConkey in yards per route run behind Keenan Allen, behind Quentin Johnston, a decent bit, a little bit ahead of Trey Harris. The first down rates all pretty similar, aside from Keenan being quite a bit higher. But yeah, the first thing I'd point out is most of these are not very good for the Chargers last year. And there are several reasons for that. One is that they ran one of the highest rates of 3 or more receivers on the field on their dropbacks. So that is naturally going to dilute all per route data. The more wide receivers you have on the field, the lower the yards per route run is going to be for all of them individually. Just because they're running more routes, they are tougher target competition than tight ends and fullbacks, right? As we have talked about with all our personnel related stuff with Lad McConkey. So that's like affecting the entire Chargers offense. The other thing that's happening is if the only like decent per route outcome on this offense is Keenan Allen, who, and I feel like people say, oh, Keenan Allen, like old wash, whatever. Keenan Allen is like a freaking Hall of Famer in my mind, man. Like he's like one of the best just like target earners in the NFL of the past decade. It doesn't really scare me at all that Keenan Allen was able to come in, play like a slightly more situational role in that he is largely playing on third downs, 11 personnel. Like he's just kind of the Justin Herbert third down security blanket. That him doing that is like the only way to get a decent per route outcome out of this offense. That kind of tells me like we don't need to be that worried about this year of individual per route numbers for any of those receivers, right? If you flip the page back into Lad's rookie year, it was up at 2.25 yards per route run, I believe, which is incredibly strong. That's the 6th best per route season for any rookie wide receiver in the fantasy points data era. So like we have instances of very strong per route data for Lad. Obviously an instance of a not so strong per route outcome for him last year, right? On the first downs per route run point, where the yards per route run have generally been better relatively compared to the first downs per route run. I do think people have a little bit of like a mistaken belief about the type of player that Lad McConkey is, or at least the type that he can be. As a rookie, a lot of that efficiency legitimately was on like the downfield big plays. Lad is like a very underrated, like deep threat, big play, go ball type of receiver. I should have found this before the show or sent the tweet out, but I sent a tweet out a couple days ago comparing Lad's yards per route run just on go routes to all other wide receivers over the last 4 years. He's in the top 5, just ahead of Tyreek Hill. So like what he's look at that. We got this pulled right up here. So yeah, this is legitimately it. Like if you thought Ladd was just like a short area player and that's kind of his game and that therefore maybe he should just be the PPR scam, higher first down per route run type. This is like what I'd say is I think he's just way better as a big play, deep threat than he's given credit for. If you scroll down further, you can see that these splits are pretty wide just based on how healthy the Chargers tackles are. If they're on the field, there's time for these plays to develop downfield. The efficiency continues to go way up. So I can kind of make a case here and say, well, if he compares to Tyreek Hill in this way, where McDaniel really unlocked Hill in terms of getting him both going on the short PPR cheat code stuff and also, of course, being insanely high efficiency whenever they could take downfield shots. Like that to me is pretty exciting. That's like Tyreek Hill had two of the most insane seasons ever in 2022 and 2023. Like if we can kind of recreate that route profile where it's almost like layups and 3-pointers, the short and the very long stuff with high efficiency, then that's like where we really get into the Ladd McConkey ceiling. And it's all just very different usage than he was able to have last year, where you've got Keenan kind of blanketing the short area PPR cheat code stuff. You've got the offensive line kind of blanketing the downfield stuff. I think you can legit make a case for Ladd that last year's per route data is fake. The rookie season per route data is more real, and that's more how we should view him as a player. But I love any and all devil's advocacy on Ladd McConkey because I realize that I'm like super out over my skis on this player right now based on last year's data at least.
So it's not the this year's JSN that we're shooting for necessarily. It's like who's this year's 2023 Tyreek Hill?
Yeah,
which is just, nobody, by the
way. We're just going to lower the bar a little bit there. Yeah.
All right. So people think that this is a Ladd McConkey tweet. It's another Jaden Reed tweet. Look at this. 4 yards per route run on go routes. Over the past 3 seasons, wide receiver 1 in fantasy points per target, wide receiver 1 in fantasy or in passer rating when targeted. When given freaking deep routes, dude, deep throws, he's like one of the best in the league. I think he might be the best. He might just be wide receiver 1 in everything. His deep target cut up reel is insane. I wish that this guy could be more than a slot, but I don't know if we're ever going to get that. It's kind of annoying. I wanted to look at, here it is, BTJ. So you brought this up. I wanted to throw this on the screen as well. You talked about the horizontally breaking routes. This is the last guy I wanted to mention before we get to our next stat. But there was a clear change for BTJ, and I wanted to show this for the fantasy points data team because I just think this is so sick. So Ryan's talking about this. You can see this is his rookie season when he went nuts at the end of the year. He got a lot more horizontally breaking routes, very few go routes. Only 15% of his routes were go routes here, according to the fantasy points data team's charting. And then you see the green and the yellow here, lots of in-breaking routes, 91st percentile on out routes as well. So lots of H-break routes here for BTJ during his breakout. And then much, much different in 2025. So we've got the pre-Jacoby Myers route tree here, and then the post-Jacoby Myers route tree here, 97th percentile go route. It's like double what it was in 2024 when he was breaking out. I do think that's relevant, man. I mean, nobody knows what to really do with the Jaguars receiving room. I think that it makes so much sense that Parker Washington will be an important part of what they do because he's by far their best at attacking over the middle of the field. And that's somewhere that Liam Cohen really likes to attack, is the intermediate deep area over the middle of the field. And that was where we saw BTJ really struggle early in the year. And then when they found the rhythm, it was Parker Washington who was such a big part of making that happen. But at the same time, this is something we just talked about, Rich Rebar, if James Gladstone is insistent on them doing the copycat stuff and going to more of the big formations, then does that mean that Parker Washington comes off the field? Because who are their best outside receivers? The answer is just clearly BTJ and Jacoby Myers. I think Parker Washington is great, but I was just reading Matt Harmon's reception perception profile on Parker Washington, and he he's just like, he's good. He's very good at what he does, but he's a short, compact guy who doesn't have any sort of like elite burst or quickness, so he kind of struggles against press coverage. That's not really the best way to use him. The best way to use him is as the slot weapon, which is what Cohen unlocked, is like kind of the vertical attacking slot where he doesn't have to face as much press coverage. He can get this build-up speed, and then he can go dominate at the catch point, and he can go dominate after the catch. That's what he's really, really good at, Parker Washington. And so I don't know, man, if they're going to take him off of the field, like what the hell do we do with this receiver room? Do we just draft Jacoby Myers? Like, because I just don't, this role that you hit on, the change here for BTJ, it does make me nervous. I'm not really buying the offseason hype. I think it's good for the real life offense. I think it's good for BTJ that he's feeling more comfortable in everything and playing well, and everybody feels good about it. But like for fantasy for this year, I need to see it, because there are very few receivers who have this type of vertical downfield outside only type of route tree that are relevant for fantasy. They have to be like so good at that. And I don't know if he's there yet. I don't know if I'm ready to say that. Maybe he would be. Maybe if they produce an abnormal amount of passing touchdowns and a lot of those come through him, like he could definitely have that kind of a year. But that's really betting on good variance with like downfield stuff working out in his favor. I don't know, man. I'm having a tough time with it. Of course, everybody is. Nobody really knows what to do with this offense.
Yeah, my thoughts just on Jaguars receivers in general. I don't super buy the 12 personnel stuff from James Gladstone.
Yeah.
To me, like Liam Cohen has always been a 11 personnel leaning coach. His slot receiver has always been highly productive. That's kind of how he's always generated really efficient offense. I don't really expect him to fully go away from that. But what I would be more concerned about in terms of all of these Jaguars receivers is if they're at all serious about like Travis Hunter is going to play somewhat of a role on offense, like a 30 to 40% route share, even if it's that's like knocking down the playing time of at least one or two of Parker Washington, BTJ, Jacoby Myers. It's kind of unclear who that's going to be. If you want to just map onto, well, he played slot last year, it could be Washington. It could be BTJ. It could be really any of these guys. The beats seem to think that Jacoby Myers is like the safest from this for what it's worth. And that's like kind of how we have it projected at fantasy points as well. But it's like legitimately a lot of downside. Like if you're at just a 60% route share because Travis Hunter's coming on the field like once in every 3 drives, that makes you like a much worse and less fantasy viable player, even if you are quite efficient. So like the comparison I've made is that Jacksonville could just be Green Bay South, basically. We could have like a very frustrating receiver rotation with 4 guys that are all kind of cannibalizing each other. And I guess in that scenario, Jacoby Myers is like the Romeo Dobbs of the past few years, where, he's the one that is actually on the field the most for an 80% route share, never really leaves. But he is not like the most explosive, most efficient weapon on the team. Like he'll probably have some of the worst per route data like of that group of receivers, and people will be really annoyed about it basically. And like none of them will be massive like fantasy contributors beyond that of like a low end wide receiver too. So that's kind of my base case for the Jaguars passing game. I'm much more into like, you should draft Trevor Lawrence, you should draft Bashal Tutin. But I think the receivers are genuinely tough projections.
I think that's fair. I do think that the expectation will be that they'll pass way more than Green Bay. So like the total number in terms of targets, potentially yards, but mostly receptions and touchdowns could be a lot higher than we've had in Green Bay, where it's kind of oriented around the run game. All right. Yeah. We're going to take our second break. We're going to get back and talk about first down per route run rate, and first read rates. First read rates, proprietary metric from Fantasy Points data that has correlated pretty strongly in terms of future fantasy scoring. So I want to talk about some players who took a big step forward in that metric in 2025 after this break.
You think you understand how this business works, but you don't. I now know why Monty was so stressed.
What's your plan here?
Landman. New season now streaming. Only on Paramount Plus.
Alrighty. So Ryan's research shows that this metric, first read target rates, actually performs better than regular target share, which I do think is noteworthy. First read targets, you see right here, just below, like receiving yardage market share and expected fantasy points, which are obviously really great stats. So let's talk about some players who look good within this metric. Let's talk about Garrett Wilson. I don't feel like I get to talk about Garrett Wilson that much. I guess there's just not really a whole lot to say other than this sucks. I'm curious what you think, because some people are optimistic that 2025 could be better. And what we saw last year was definitely noteworthy. I don't know how sustainable it is, what to think of it, but Garrett Wilson had a 32% first read target rate in 2024, which is high. He had a 44% rate last year, which is like Jackson Smith and Jigba and nobody else pretty much ever. Like, what the hell? 44%. Any thoughts on Garrett Wilson? Do you think that rookies or Adonai Mitchell are going to pull away from that rate in a significant way? What are you thinking on Wilson in 2025?
In terms of does the additional target competition matter with the rookies, I think probably no, at least not in like a significant way. This just is Garrett Wilson to me. He's a total alpha. He's going to always command a really high first read target share. If he's ever on like a legitimately productive passing offense, the fantasy football results are going to be really great. And they were, even last year before his injury, he was a low-end wide receiver one by fantasy points per game, expected fantasy points per game, all of our metrics before injuring his knee in week 6. And that's one that I think people have memory hold quite a bit, is just how solid Garrett Wilson was last year. Like we finally got the peripheral metrics kind of turning into like legitimate top 12 wide receiver fantasy points, which was nice to see. We knew it was going to happen eventually. We only got it for 6 weeks. But yeah, in terms of this year, I want to be optimistic. I think the share of the offense will remain pretty similar. I had kind of a complicated stat where his first read target rate went like insanely high when the Jets weren't using motion on their dropbacks, with motion being like a very big Tanner Engstrand thing that is definitely going away with Frank Reich now as the play caller. So maybe there's something there in terms of just a less complicated offense. Not that this necessarily means a better offense, but just a less complicated offense, just kind of even more naturally funnels targets Garrett Wilson's way. But yeah, it really comes down to like what you think of Geno Smith. Clearly for fantasy football purposes, Geno should be better than a Justin Fields because of what we talked about earlier, drop back conversion rate. Fields is like one of the worst over the past 5 years in terms of turning dropbacks into sacks, scrambles, and throwaways. Geno Smith a lot closer to average, even last year when obviously he wasn't very great. So that's something to consider. But also, yeah, I think it's tough to get super bought into players on the Jets is just where I'm at. When you look at the implied point totals, the implied win totals, when you look at how Geno Smith performed last year, like unless you're really in on him and like really think that he is like can perform a lot better given a better environment, it's just hard for me to go super all in. But like I get it. I get the Garrett Wilson people this year 100%. It really just does come down to where are you at on the Jets for me, because I have no doubt about any of the other stuff with him.
Okay, what about Drake London? Wide receiver 6 in first read target rate here. So Wilson is 2, Jamar Chase is 3. His rate rose to the highest point we've ever seen it. Puka Nacua, Amon St. Brown, and then Drake London at 36%. It was 39% pre-injury. I'm finding myself wanting to move London down in my rankings. I'm finding myself like wanting to move somebody like A.J. Brown ahead of London. for upside-based reasons. And it's bothering me because I like to be high on London. I think he's just such a good player. He's been the per route king in so many ways, even dating back to college. And if you look at the metrics that matter here, all of them check out, especially early in the season. He was really, really, really good. So am I just overthinking things here with London? Do you have any thoughts on him and where does he rank for you compared to maybe more boom bust types of receivers that you could take in round 2?
Yeah, London's one of my favorite receivers to draft in round 2. I rank him above AJ Brown, and it really is for kind of a lot of the reasons you just touched on, which is, all the peripheral data has basically always been amazing for his entire career. It wasn't resulting in fantasy points on like the very low volume Arthur Smith offenses, but it has started to in recent seasons. Before his PCL injury, he was a top 6 wide receiver by fantasy points per game, or even ahead of that. I think like a top 4 wide receiver by fantasy points per game. So even with Michael Penix like on a Falcons offense that wasn't super amazing, he just had such a amazing just consolidation of the offense and of the targets that he was a legitimately elite fantasy receiver. So I just kind of don't want to overthink that. I think we are likely getting Tua Tagovailoa as the week 1 starter. He honestly is this is, I think, counterintuitive to some, but I think he's probably even more, or just as much at least, of a fantasy-friendly quarterback to a Michael Penix. He's going to get the ball out quickly. He really doesn't want to take sacks. He's definitely not scrambling around. He's going to have a higher drop-back conversion rate. We've just seen the splits with Michael Penix, and the chemistry between him and London are really good. So I think you kind of have this built-in safety net where if maybe the offense isn't super working in the first few weeks with Tua Tagovailoa, they are very incentivized to just instantly go back to Michael Penix the moment that he's healthy enough, which should be somewhat early in the season. So I think there's more insulation here for London than your typical bad team receiver. And I think that's why I just kind of have that faith in him compared to a Garrett Wilson, where I'm just much more willing to buy in. I would rank him. I think you're very high on George Pickens personally. So he'd be my wide receiver 7 if I'm not forgetting anybody, just with Pickens behind where you have London. Pickens is much closer to like a Nico Collins for me. But that's about where I'm at, and how it works out, just where I'm at on the running back versus the wide receiver position at the top of drafts. London is very often my target in the middle to the back half of round 2 right now.
Yeah, so I got my wide receiver rankings on the screen. And after Amon-Ra St. Brown, it is tough to work through that range. I think Pickens has the most upside. I think Pickens could finish as the wide receiver 1 in all of fantasy. Depends on what his engagement level is, how locked in he is consistently throughout the season. But the guy is good at everything. And he's in an offense that's been top 3 in fantasy points at 2 of the past 3 years. And I think was the best we've ever seen it last year. So to me, clearly he has more upside than London. It's really not close. And then I think AJ Brown and Rashee Rice both have significantly more upside as well. And I'm nervous that I'm going to end up pushing Rice ahead of London, and I don't want to do that. Jefferson and London are who I have directly behind Pickens. So I have Pickens at 6, Jefferson at 7, London at 8, and then Nico Collins, AJ Brown, and Rice currently. And I just don't know. I don't know what to do with it. I think London and Jefferson are really similar, but there's a low probability path to more upside if the quarterback play is better than expected in Minnesota. Maybe that happens with Tua, but I just don't know. And I also think Jefferson is slightly better than London. I think I'm so high on London, but obviously Justin Jefferson is just the man. So that's kind of where I come out is I think that the offense wants to be run heavy. And I think there's a lot of parallels here with Jefferson, London, and Nico, where they're really, really, really good players, but I don't know how high the actual ceiling is. And I have some concerns that if the offense completely falls apart, there's a floor problem too. Like we just saw with Justin Jefferson last year. I don't think it would get that bad in Atlanta, but I really don't know what's going to happen there. I think getting rid of their offensive line coach and some of the steps backwards they took in terms of rushing success rate last year is a potential red flag. And I just don't feel very good about the organization as a whole. So I'm a little bit nervous. a little bit nervous about London. I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it does just come down to I think the Falcons have like a convincing contingency plan built in with the two quarterbacks. Like I genuinely think that's a positive, that if one fails, you have another shot. We can totally be in a place in week 4 where we're like, oh man, this offense is just like not working, and then we get a quarterback change and it does. Where I don't really we definitely don't see that with the Texans. Definitely don't see that with the Vikings. I think I'm just more positive on Kyler and like how all this is going to work with the Vikings than you are. And I guess the George Pickens like with CeeDee Lamb splits weigh a little bit heavier in my mind than it looks like they do to you, just in terms of how you have it ranked. But yeah, Pickens was, I don't have it off the top of my head, but it was not like mid-range wide receiver 1 numbers with CeeDee Lamb active. If you just look at, removing week 3 when he played a couple snaps in the next few weeks that he missed and was limited. So that's where I'm at. But I do think like a blind spot we often have in the offseason is we just aren't worried enough about a lot of these offenses that we should be. And then it becomes very obvious, like in week 1, week 2, the moment we actually see some of these offenses. So I'm sympathetic to like your line of thinking. But I think specifically for London, I'm just not that as worried about it.
Yeah, I don't want to get too caught on the Pickens thing, but it's truly, it's like basically 99% just a football guy thing, just a film bro thing, where it's like you watch Pickens and it's like, well, that's one of the best players in the NFL. That guy's so insanely good. He broke out as a freaking 18-year-old at Georgia, was like completely dominating, and I don't know, man, he's just nuts. and all the Schottenheimer related reasons too that we're going to get into. Schottenheimer and Clayton Adams are cooking in Dallas. Okay, I've got a question from the chat that I wanted to address. So yeah, these are my rankings, and I will be sending out the FFT newsletter soon, by the way. So we're back. That's fun, and you'll be able to find my rankings there. The question from the chat is about the Arizona receivers. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about this if you had any interest in it, because they're not on the show sheet today. They're curious if the per route data says anything for Marv and Michael Wilson. I think they're specifically curious about the splits with Jacoby Brissett in there. A note that I thought was interesting from Rich Rebar was that the schedule for Arizona, especially in the early part of the season, is absolutely brutal. And so he just thinks the chances of Jacoby Brissett lasting through that is very low, and that we're probably going to see 1, if not 2 of the backup quarterbacks in as they try to like make their way through and just find a single win at the beginning of the season. I think that's interesting. And the other thing I wanted to point out to people is that Dave Richard is coming on the show this week to help us talk about some of the toughest players to rank. And that, of course, includes the Cardinals receivers. People have been asking us constantly about Arizona's receivers, and they keep asking because my answer is just, I don't know. And so if you have anything, go ahead and add it. And if not, then we'll keep this thing rolling here.
I don't have a per route stat, but I do have interesting Arizona receiver stats in terms of first read target share, actually. So with Jacoby Brissett, this is a 3-game sample in terms of full games for Marvin Harrison Jr. with Jacoby Brissett. The first read target share was 38%, which would have been the wide receiver 4 last year. That was higher than Trey McBride in those games at 36.6%. The expected fantasy points per game was also like top 5 level. The fantasy points per game a bit below that. It was an inefficient offense. We kind of know this. So that to me is genuinely interesting and exciting. Like even if you want to say, well, the Cardinals aren't going to have as much garbage time, Jacoby Brissett's not going to last as long, we're going to get Carson Beck at some point. Just the fact that even in that small sample that Harrison was alphaing McBride in terms of target volume and first read target share is legitimately interesting to me. And I think Marv is not being thought of necessarily in that way right now. Like he goes down with like Brian Thomas Jr. in terms of where he's getting drafted right now. Like people are very down on him relative to where he was as a prospect, which is one of the best, at least in my model's history and probably most people's models' histories. So that's like legit interesting to me, just because I think you have talent-based upside there. You have the upside of Mike LaFleur has allowed quarterbacks like Joe Flacco and Mike White to kind of go crazy in garbage time. It wouldn't be the craziest thing to see Brissett or even Gardner Minshew kind of run that back, like what the Cardinals, with the scam the Cardinals were running last year for fantasy, basically. I think we could live in that world possibly. But then, yeah, when you look at Michael Wilson's splits with Marvin Harrison Jr. on and off the field, or just in 2 versus 3 receiver sets, that they are pretty stark. Michael Wilson just looks like not a fantasy relevant player when he's in 3 receiver sets or when Marv's on the field. So that's like where I would lean more towards in terms of how I look at him. I don't like Michael Wilson at his ADP or anything like that. I think he's mostly just a contingent value bet, and even then probably a worse one this year, just because the Cardinals actually have some tertiary pass catchers now. They have Kendrick Bourne. There's probably going to be relatively more 11 personnel, 3 receiver sets compared to last year. I don't think he gets to run the same type of like condensed personnel scam that he kind of did last year.
It's funny, man. The much maligned Marvin Harrison Jr. had like across the board better per route data than basically all these guys we've talked about today that people want to believe are going to bounce back, whether it's McConkey or BTJ or whoever. I mean, even just like first down per route run rate is very similar for Marv, 0.084 to Malik Neighbors, 0.087, who played in a bad offense last year, or Justin Jefferson, 0.088, where it's like, well, these guys are obviously elite. You know, they're just held down by their offense. And it's like, Marv has the pedigree and also played in a pretty not wide receiver friendly offense. And his production on a per opportunity basis is pretty similar. Andy was hurt, and everybody just leaves him for dead, which I don't know. It's fantasy, man. It's just funny. Alrighty. A few more I wanted to talk about through a first read target lens before we hit another break here. The first being Jaylen Waddle. So 29% first read target rate for Waddle. That's up from 18% in 2024. From week 5 on, so following the Tyreek Hill injury, it was at 30.4%, which is wide receiver 12. Hit a 0.137 first down per route run rate, wide receiver 6. Very, very impressive in this offense. A 30% yardage market share, wide receiver 12. So really good stuff from Waddle. I think it's encouraging just because it signals that, this might be a guy who can be the clear wide receiver 1 in an offense, and he has maybe an opportunity to do that in Denver. Is he somebody you've been drafting much?
Yes, a ton.
Ooh, a ton.
And I would challenge you here because I saw earlier your Devonta Smith ranking was like wide receiver 13, wide receiver 14, something like that. Mm-hmm. How different are Jaylen Waddle and Devonta Smith actually in terms of their situations right now? Both are finally entering the season as the likely wide receiver 1 on their team. Waddle is moving after we see all this amazing per route data, first read data on a lower passing volume offense in the Dolphins to a much higher passing volume offense in the Broncos. Bo Nick's been near the top of the league in dropbacks each of the past couple of seasons. Everything we hear about new play caller Davis Webb is that they're making the change because Nix wants to play faster and get the play call in quicker so that he can have more and more plays. I'm pretty into Jaylen Waddle, man. The per route data has basically always been awesome. The raw fantasy production has just not always been there because after his rookie season, he was playing next to Tyreek Hill. Especially in the last couple of years, the Dolphins have had to lean a lot more run heavy just with the Tua Tagovailoa of it all. But yeah, like why can Waddle not be like a low end wide receiver 1 this year? I'm like pretty bought into this idea. I think he's a better receiver and a better target earner than a Cortland Sutton. I think he can play a much more fantasy friendly role. We see all these design targets in Sean Payton's offense that he loves doing. Those have been going to like Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin the past couple of years. What if Waddle just steps in and kind of gets that? They've been calling him the queen chess piece or something like that. So that suggests a full-time role, full-time route share to me. I'm pretty into Waddle. I'd have him up kind of in that tier with like the Mike Evanses, the Egbukas, the Burdens. Like I think that's like more accurately describes his upside this year. And I've been clicking him a lot at cost because of that.
That's totally fair. Yeah, I probably need to move Waddle up. I've always been high on Waddle from a talent standpoint. So here's a tweet that I like to reference. Prior to the disaster 2024 season where the Dolphins, it was just bad for everybody. I mean, that was the weird H.N. and Jonnu Smith year, But before that, just like, look at this, man. 18-year-old breakout, freaking highest career yard per route run rate of any wide receiver drafted during this time, dating back to 2020. Declares in his third year, gets drafted 6th overall, 1,000 yards as a rookie, wide receiver 8 in fantasy the next year. And then in year 3, he has his career best yard per route run rate. Like, it was just a rocket ship. And that was even with Tyreek coming in. And then, 2024 was a disaster. But then 2025, right back on track, right? Like, looks like a really, really good player. I think the Devonta Smith comparison is interesting. So I'm probably a little too high on Smith. But that's mostly because, like, I don't know what to do at all after the A.J. Brown, Rashee Rice, Nico Collins tier. Like, these guys are all the same, basically. And I think you could push Waddle up into that range. So the discrepancy on paper here between the two in my rankings doesn't actually represent like how I feel about the two comparatively, I don't think. I think I do inherently, I lean more towards a player like Smith stylistically in terms of the route running ability. I think that he can unlock every single area on the field because he's so technically refined. I don't know if Waddle can do that, but with a good play designer and good weapons around him, I don't know if that really matters that much because Waddle can do so much more after the catch than Smith, right? And can create a lot of these massive chunk plays where, Smith winning 5 times and catching a sideline ball for 15 yards adds up to just one Jaylen Waddle play. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think he should probably be a lot higher. And really, this is just kind of a conversation about the wide receiver position at large at this point, where after this top 12-ish group, there's a lot of different directions you can go based off of who you believe in.
Yeah, right. That's a good call on the position as a whole too, because what we saw last year was that there was basically a top 6, and then it was extremely flat from like wide receiver 8 through 30 plus, and that's kind of how it feels this year. Just in terms of there's a lot of compelling upside profiles kind of in this range in the 20s and even into the 30s, but there's not like so much. There aren't like these sharp tier breaks at any point kind of after the top handful is also how I'm viewing the position.
Yeah. The next thing I want to talk about, I do have ranked ahead of Waddle, but I am coming in a lot lower than consensus, which I don't like. That's Tetairoa McMillan. So I've got a player profile coming out on McMillan that'll be on the channel soon. There's a lot of interesting angles to think about here. I think we've gotten a bit like reductionist with McMillan, where it's just like, well, Panthers suck and they're not gonna pass for anything, and so like doesn't even matter. It's like doesn't even matter. McMillan, just don't even worry about it. Don't even draft him. Don't even think about him. And it's like, I don't know. He put some pretty crazy shit on film and in the spreadsheets or wherever you want to look last year for a rookie. So like that might matter. I love Jalen Coker as much as the next sicko, but like, I don't know. I don't want to get carried away here where we're just like writing off McMillan's ability to have a big year, even within an offensive ecosystem that might not be that good. So I wanted to bring up a comparison to Nico Collins. I think that this is interesting. Getting back to the first read rates here. So where is McMillan? Here he is. Wide receiver 16, just below Waddle, just above Nico Collins. Almost identical first read rates, almost identical first down per route run rates between T-Mac and Nico, which I think is very interesting. No, they do have identical first down per route run rates. Just a wildly effective year in terms of producing first downs for McMillan. So you'll find all that information in that profile. I'll give some historical context on that. In terms of comparing him and Nico, they're both in run-heavy offenses for sure. Like all the reasons that people are worried about T-Mac and his volume, I think apply to Nico Collins, where this could be the most run-heavy the Texans have ever been. Their defense is so nasty, and they might actually be able to run the ball this year. It seems like that's what they want to do. And so like I think they're kind of set up to play the way that the Panthers want to play, except they're better equipped to do it. And then the other thing is their win total is 9.5 for the Texans. So there's only 7 teams with a higher win total. So I think on paper, they'll probably be playing with a lead a lot. Whereas the Panthers have a 7.5 win total and there's only 8 teams that are lower. So the Panthers are tied with the Giants, the Commanders, the Saints, and the Colts in terms of implied wins, and only 8 teams are lower. So they're really not expected to be good this year. Maybe they'll be able to just bully people on the ground and everything, but I don't know. I think they might have to take to the air more than we're expecting.
Yeah, that's a compelling comparison to me. I don't know that it makes me higher on Tetairoa McMillan, more so than it just makes me lower and lower on Nico Collins. I think that everything you just said makes a lot of sense. One thing I would say on the Panthers is, yes, while they're not going to be as high a win total team as the Texans or as good a team, like it on paper, you'd think maybe they're going to be chasing points more. In practice, it's like Bryce Young has 2 career 300-yard games. One thing I will give Dave Canales a ton of credit on that he probably doesn't get enough credit for in this specific area is he will just slow down a game in terms of going much lower play volume to kind of increase the variance when they're playing a better team. So that's bad overall for fantasy production for, Tetairoa McMillan's fantasy points. But it's going to increase their chances of sticking with a team like the Rams, like we saw them do last year. Just because if there's fewer plays, it's higher variance. Like the better teams are going to have less room to separate on the scoreboard. So I think for those reasons, like I'm not going to be talked into Tetairoa McMillan from a fantasy perspective, but I totally agree with you. Like he just is the new Garrett Wilson. He is the new Drake London, where for years these guys just always had amazing peripherals. And we kind of always knew eventually at some point the situation will get better and they will turn it into legit fantasy production. I just don't think that's this year for McMillan. And whereas I think that's very much going to continue this year for Drake London, and for Garrett Wilson, I'm kind of on the fence. So that's like how I would organize like those guys for this year. I would have Wilson ahead of McMillan just because I think there's more of a chance that the Jets end up in a lot of these like negative game scripts and legitimately drop back a bunch and kind of end up having to lean on Wilson more. I think the Panthers are much more likely, even if they get into those scripts, to just continue trying to shorten games.
All right, so you're pretty low on McMillan. Do you have him like outside of your top 24? I have him ahead of Wilson. You said you'd have Wilson ahead of him.
Yeah, I'd have McMillan. I'm just disoriented by your rankings, but yeah, I would have him. I'd have him behind Evans, behind McLaurin, behind Neighbors, behind Garrett Wilson. I think like right with Jaylen Waddle is probably fair, but you're already quite a bit below consensus. There might be a couple guys you have higher I'd pull down so that it evens out a little more, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Mike Evans. I do have Evans one spot behind McMillan, but I acknowledge that there's clearly tons of upside with Mike Evans. So if you want to check out this video that Dan and I put up on Evans like 3 months ago, we go into all the reasons why it could be really, really a huge season for him. I think he's one of the highest upside picks available wide receiver. Could be one of the most important wide receivers for fantasy this year, like point blank. And then, just real quick on the McMillan, I want to just acknowledge that there is a clear distinction between him and Nico Collins, and it's that Nico Collins can just like create 60-yard touchdowns all on his own at any time. I think there is clearly like way, way, way more yardage upside with Nico Collins. So even if their volume stats look the same, I don't think that we should expect the output to be the same. There's more upside with Nico. I just did find it interesting that the rates were so similar because they're both big-bodied guys, number one receivers in the offense and everything. And everybody's so worried about T-Mac, whereas the setup is really pretty similar for Nico. On Mike Evans, 35% first read target rate before his injury, 35%, super, super high. That dropped a little bit when he returned. It was 27%. And it was only 3 games that I have that sample size on the 35%. But for reference, that's like up in the A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson range. But he did continue to produce elite first down per route run rates upon returning. And so I wanted to point that out. That like when on the field, he was clearly the most effective first down per route run rate producer for Tampa Bay. So I wanted to throw it to you. And if you have any thoughts on Evans in San Francisco, I know that you've dug into like the number one receiver for Kyle Shanahan and how effective they've been. So let me know how aggressive you're getting with drafting Evans this year.
Yeah, I'm trying to be pretty aggressive. This is like how I kind of conceive of this tier of receivers is these are all like the moonshot upside bets to me. I think like T. Higgins specifically is like the last guy where the case is as simple. When we think back to our most predictive metrics, for T. Higgins, the case is as simple as like he's been the wide receiver 7 by fantasy points per game with Joe Burrow over the last 2 or 3 years. Like that, like I don't think you have to make it any more complicated than that. After Higgins, you do have to make it more complicated than that. And for Evans, yeah, I think there's a lot of these kind of like tangential indicators that are pointing an arrow upward. It's all the Kyle Shanahan stuff. This is the best receiver that Shanahan has had since prime Julio Jones. As you said, the per route data was for first downs per route run was at least solid. All of the separation score metrics over at Fantasy Points data for Evans over the last couple of years are very good, despite him playing through all of these lower body injuries. And of course, yeah, the scoring has been good over stretches, especially at the end of 2024, even after he came back from a hamstring injury. When in that Liam Cohen offense, when Baker Mayfield was totally balling out. So I can see, just because of Evans having played in so many 3 receiver sets, like you can make a case for we get to a more condensed Shanahan offense. The per route data comes way up. The touchdown column is never a concern for Evans. That's always something that you are going to feel pretty good about. So yeah, he legitimately is like, it's like Devontae Adams last year, but if there was no Puka Nacua on the team, it is like the highest upside, like at least like closest comparison I can make. Obviously downside with injuries, with age, all of these concerns, but yeah, I feel like it's just kind of overthinking to not be super excited about Evans in this setup. So yeah, I'm drafting him ahead of McMillan. I'm drafting him ahead of Devontae Adams. I'm drafting him right now ahead of Emeka Egbuka. I can totally be swayed on Egbuka though. I won't rank him ahead of Luther Burden, but in practice, yeah. I'm getting more Evans in practice. But yeah.
All right, we're going to talk about Emeka Egbuka when we get back. I've also got an Emeka Egbuka profile coming with Dan the Man Schneier. Excited for that. We're going to do a deep dive on the film and what we saw from him during his rookie season. Is a very weird rookie season from Egbuka, like completely different than what you might have expected, I think, given his role at Ohio State, the way that Tampa Bay used him last year. So we're going to talk about all that when we get back from our third break here, and then also talk about some of the play caller effectiveness here and in terms of how that changed things for Egbuka with his role last year and how it might be different under Zach Robinson here in year 2 after this break.
Soccer isn't a new game in the United States. The immigrants brought it here in 1912.
The opportunity to play for my country, I just could not pass that up.
We're all very proud of you.
Not everyone is aware of what happened in important historical moments for American soccer.
I was the kid that shouldn't have made it. Kid from Nacogdoches, Texas.
Clint Dipsy Doodle.
Kind of one of those things I wasn't going to be denied.
People criticize me often.
You can't take it seriously. It's the USA.
But I get to have that attention because I'm good.
We were carrying the weight of American soccer on our shoulders.
I'm gonna put it shot.
Probably unfair to 20 guys.
When he looks at you, he looks like he wants to kill you. And I have respect for that.
It's about how much are you willing to give to win.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown.
The USA has realized the dream.
Dempsey threw the ball in. What can this kid
do? When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ hits every highlight from all the sports that matter to you.
JJ, we appreciate your time breaking it down.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
With the plays you missed.
What a finish at the final round of play.
And analysis to give you an edge.
All we need is 20 points.
I was shaking in my boots.
Texas, Ohio State, who wins this game?
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
CBS Sports HQ, streaming free 24/7.
Already, Emeka Egbuka, man, really, really weird season. I meant to talk about him earlier when we looked specifically at players who had troubling first down per route run rates. Like Ladd McConkey and Jordan Addison both sort of stood out to me. But Egbuka is the one. Like, if you just sort by first down per route run rates and then look at like yards per route run next to it, it's clearly him who stands out among the entire NFL. So let me pull it up. And first, just real quick before we even get to him, do you have any thoughts on Addison at all? Because I know you're kind of behind him last year, and then obviously disaster run out with the way things went in Minnesota. Do you have any thoughts on him for 2026?
Yeah, my mind has recently been very changed on Jordan Addison because of something we've been talking about some over the course of this show is just route depth. Zane Donani, who's one of our genius data people, also a film charter at Fantasy Points Data, has a really cool article coming out on this in the next few days, basically breaking down why the deeper deeper route break players are just worse for fantasy. That's in terms of fewer spike weeks, which is shocking to people, and also, of course, fewer usable weeks. And Addison's route depth has been trending deeper and deeper and deeper every year of his career. They're losing Jalen Naylor, adding Juwan Jennings, so they're losing a deep threat, adding more of a short intermediate threat. I think we should assume that mostly continues in terms of Addison continuing to primarily be used as a downfield threat. And that just makes me lose a ton of interest in him for fantasy. Kyler Murray, not the highest deep ball attempt rate quarterback either. There's just a lot of reasons that I'm just kind of losing interest in Jordan Addison. So yeah, random player, but I did have a recent new take on him I wanted to share. So yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, that's good stuff. All right, let's look at Emeka Egbuka. Here he is in first downs per route run, 0.069 according to the Fantasy Points data suite. That puts him right in between Dimey Brown, Tim Patrick, Troy Franklin, and Gabe Davis, Elikayo Manor, and Tyquan Thornton. What? He averaged 1.9 yards per route run, but his first down per route run I ranked him 66th out of 146 qualified receivers. It was weird because in college, he was Mr. Consistent basically for Ohio State. He did give some explosive plays, but he was more of a slot type of option. And then in Tampa Bay, he was used down the field a lot. And so I'm wondering, Ryan, do you think that this is just a total kind of fluke of a season? I know people say that a lot with Egbuka. When they watch the downfield targets and stuff, there were some broken, busted coverages or whatever that led to some of these big hits. And obviously the big plays are what affects the yard per route run rate, and then affects all these historical stats that we're seeing on Egbuka, comparing the start of his season to other receivers in terms of yards produced and everything. Or do you think that this first down per route run rate is just kind of a one-off and we'll see him be more consistent in a different type of role in year two?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're talking about here, in terms of especially early in the season when he has all these big plays that's juicing the yardage compared to the first downs per route run, I think a lot of this is more of a Baker Mayfield stat than an Emeka Egbuka stat, honestly. Yeah, when you watch those plays and when you just kind of look at how Baker has played, at least when he's been healthy the past couple of years, Baker's just super willing to kind of force the ball into those downfield tighter windows. Him and Egbuka very quickly kind of had that chemistry to develop those types of big plays. So I think that could come back a little bit, and that could be the type of player that Egbuka is in the NFL, just as a consequence of playing with Baker Mayfield and being the guy that's trusted on those downfield shots. But I also kind of think that everyone's super overthought Emeka Egbuka just in terms of the early season splits versus the late season splits. Yes, he was scoring a lot more fantasy points early in the year, largely because of everything I just talked about. Baker's shoulder and oblique and everything else being healthier, the offense just kind of working much better in that sense. But if you look weeks 1 through 6 versus weeks 7 through 18 for Egbuka by expected fantasy points per game, so total volume, it's basically the same. It was about 14 expected fantasy points per game, a mid-range to high-end-ish wide receiver 2 for basically the entire season. Of course, there's a couple weird games where he's rotating routes with Jaylen McMillan. I don't really expect that to happen again this year. I expect him to be a full-time player. But I just my pause with Egbuka is actually the target competition. I don't think it's a given that Chris Godwin is completely washed. We've seen a lot of receivers and players in general look better the year after a fibula injury. Of course, Godwin also gruesomely dislocated his ankle. Is one of the older receivers in terms of guys you could compare him to recently. So yeah, maybe he's just done and washed, but Godwin's not really the type that relies a ton on physicality or like going to go win outside. Like he's much more of like a slot receiver, feel for zone type of guy. Used to be like a good run after the catch guy. Maybe that's gone. But I think you can see like the run out of Chris Godwin kind of into his early 30s continuing to be a target earner. So that like makes me worry a little more for Egbuka, just because he never really had to deal with that last year, where it was basically him as the only show in town, especially whenever Mike Evans was injured or not playing. And then when Evans was playing at the end of the year, Egbuka's production went way down. So for me, like I can tell myself the story of like Egbuka takes a massive leap and the big plays just come back and he continues being like the means through which Baker Mayfield creates these really fun downfield shot plays. But I don't super want to bank on that. I don't think so. He's in a weird spot. I acknowledge the upside. I think he super fits in that range of like round 4 receivers where you can't just super simply say he scored a ton of fantasy points over the last few years, so draft him. But I don't feel like quite as good about all the like external arguments or all the external indicators as I might for like a Mike Evans or for a Lad McConkey, for example. But he belongs in those conversations to me.
Alrighty, I think that's good stuff. And again, if you want more information on Egbuka, Dan and I are going to give a deep dive here on Beyond the Box Score soon. Let's talk about horizontally breaking routes, Ryan. I think this is a pretty easy segue from Egbuka. He got a ton of these last year, and I think that's a way that we could see him be used in the future as well. So this is something that I brought up on the channel over the past year or two. I remember the first time it got on my radar was from y'all with at Fantasy Points data with Jameson Williams. So that would have been 2 years ago, where he was being used a lot more that way, and we started to see him really produce a lot of big catch and run plays with Ben Johnson on these horizontally breaking routes. And the research that you have here, this is 2021 through 2025, horizontally breaking routes being notably more efficient, notably more likely to draw a target than vertical or static route breaks. I think that the difference is even more pronounced at wide receiver, if I remember correctly from what I dug into in the past. Yep. Okay, cool. So yeah, you point out here that's really pretty crazy. If you want to talk about that anymore, we talked about it a little bit at the beginning of the show. I want to get to this chart whenever you're ready. So you can talk us through any of your thoughts on H breaking routes, and then we'll get to some of the specific examples of players.
Sure. Yeah. So just to refresh people from the beginning on what you were talking about. Yeah. So what I've found is that the last handful of seasons, a wide receiver's number of horizontally breaking routes has been a bit more predictive of their next season fantasy points than just their total number of routes. So what that implies, and what we saw based on those per route breakdowns we had on the screen, is that that suggests that horizontally breaking routes are just more valuable for fantasy. And that makes some sense, especially in PPR formats. If you're more likely to draw a target, you're more likely to score fantasy points. So that's pretty easy. How you apply this, I think, is more debatable. So yeah, we have it broken down by team here. This is just for a team's wide receivers specifically, the percentage of their routes that had horizontal breaks. And on the y-axis, we compare that to their yards per route run on those horizontally breaking routes. So top right is teams where their wide receivers are running a lot of horizontally breaking routes, and where they're being very efficient on those routes. And as you can kind of see, the teams in the top right, these were just a bunch of the best offenses in the NFL last year, is kind of how it worked out. And yeah, I loved this illustration that Jacob added here. Circled, we have every team that moved on or willingly moved on from their offensive play caller. So as you can see, most of the guys in the top right survived. A lot of the guys everywhere else didn't. So there's like a few conclusions you can draw from this, or possible ways that you can try to apply this, I think. One, and as I was getting into the weeds with Max Toscano on in the replies at one point here, I think it's super legitimate to just say, well, this just happens to be how a lot of the most efficient offenses are running. Like some of the McShanahan play callers have kind of figured this out. Like Ben Johnson has kind of independently figured this out in different ways. Like maybe the fantasy predictiveness is as simple as, yeah, these just happen to be the best teams. And you want to draft the wide receivers on the best offenses. Like I do think there's legitimately just something to that. So yeah, we can think about it on the team level, which teams might run their offenses more in this way that
as always, isn't that exactly what we're doing and saying? It's not like we're like, if you just run play action every play, you'll score a touchdown every play. It's like the play action plays are more efficient because the teams that are figuring out ways to use them effectively are creating efficient offense. Same thing with motion, same thing with this. Like all we're doing is pointing out draft players from these offenses.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's probably more helpful to think about it at the offense level for that reason, basically. I do think the individual level is worth considering, especially combined with some of what we've talked about today, where the vertical breakers will at least correlate with deeper route trees a lot of the time, which as I've explained are worse, less consistent, not as high upside in general for fantasy. But that's like not always the case, right? Like you got some great per route data from the Cowboys last year. Even with them running some more vertical breakers, Kellen Moore has been relatively successful running more vertical breakers, at least compared to his personnel. So yeah, it's not like this is the only answer or the only solution, or a player has to necessarily go one way based on their horizontal route percentage. But I think at a macro level, it's good to be aware of and think about, and just understand that deeper route tree players, again, are just going to be worse in fantasy on average.
For sure. All right, let's talk about a few examples here. Some that came to mind for me, digging through it and just thinking about last year. For sure, the Cowboys guys, they were, I think Schottenheimer is kind of a sniper. I really like, he incorporates a bunch of different elements into his offense. It's very cool. And I feel like on these H-break routes, it was like he found very specific moments to find the best weapons in his offense for catch and run opportunities. Pickens particularly, I felt like was unlocked in this way. But Lamb had really good data too, where they were like hyper targeted on these H-break routes. And I bring up Pickens because it was a big change for him. We knew that Lamb could do this. But Pickens had been like one of the most vertically oriented players in the league. And it wasn't that he ran way more H-break routes. Like you see, the Cowboys are actually like well to the left here of the league average on this chart. But it was that when he was running those routes, he was hyper targeted, he was hyper efficient. And I think Schottenheimer is just doing it about as good as anybody right now, at least last year, what we saw. Some players who ran a ton of these routes were like Lad McConkey, led the league in these routes. Honestly, do you think it is worth it to go through team by team? Like here's
let's do it.
Okay, here's everybody, and you can see Lad ran 265 of these routes, had a freaking 51% route rate, and then you can even see like on Fantasy Points data they have the separation score, the win rate, the target per route run rate on the specific types of routes, horizontally breaking routes, vertically breaking routes. You can see how these receivers did. And then if you want to, you can go like Cardinals and just look and see what the rates were for these players and how effective they were on these routes. So with the Cardinals, we got a new play caller. I'm going to kind of go through here and you can add anything you want on any of these players. And if I have anything specific, I'll throw it in there. It's just the receivers on the screen, no tight ends or running backs.
Yeah, let's do it. Okay. Let's see.
I don't know much on the Cardinals, to be honest.
Me either.
I remember digging into the H-break route stuff in 2024 and finding that Marvin Harrison Jr. got more and more play action horizontally breaking routes. And I was really excited to see him used more that way in 2025. And I think in general, that's what's happening. And he was pretty effective on these routes. I think Michael Wilson is good on these routes too. I just read his Matt Harmon's reception perception profile on Wilson, and it's pretty much what he shows up on film, where it's like he's just a freaking beast. He's just a big burly guy who like is not very fast or quick, but can create enough separation shielding with his body and is really good at the catch point, and then can create after the catch a little bit. It's like a big version of Parker Washington who has even less juice. And so like he could be useful in these types of ways. I think more of these in breaking routes. They've talked about using him like in the Puka Nakua role and stuff. I think there's some semblance to what it might look like where it could make sense. I don't think he's good on vertically breaking routes. I think your only hope there is that he just goes up and wins over the top of the guy. I think these types of routes are where he's probably going to be at his best. And you do see at a higher rate of these than Marv last year. 39% relatively high for the position. Falcons, another team with a new play designer. We saw Jerry Jeudy. I think he was second in the whole league. He was third in the league in horizontally breaking routes last year, which I think is interesting. Obviously, the coaching staff from Cleveland coming over to Atlanta. Do you have any thoughts on these? I think London kind of hyper targeted on these routes. I think this is an area where we could see him. We saw like once he moved to the big slot role that he started to even elevate his game and start to get to kind of the USC type of usage.
Yeah, I think that London's like a good example in terms of, and George Pickens, I think, falls in this category too, where when you get these, like traditionally how you'd think of them, maybe they're like these bigger outside X receivers, but yeah, they're used more on these horizontal breakers. They can kind of have more of a varied route tree and like a varied deployment like with London, with what they're talking about for Pickens this year. That is often when we see the hyper efficiency on those horizontally breaking routes just for that archetype. So yeah, I think like no real complaints about London's usage. I think that point on Jerry Jeudy is at least encouraging. Obviously the results are never as great for Jerry Jeudy, but yeah, just the fact that Tommy Rees, Kevin Stefanski were using, we're in that mindset with their number one receiver last year is encouraging to me as well. I basically have never, this is off topic, but I haven't found like anything in terms of London and the Falcons and like what Tommy Rees, Kevin Stefanski have done historically that makes me think, wow, this is going to be different in a bad way. Like it's basically always like, oh, this should basically just kind of map on to what he was doing last year. I don't know if you have anything that contradicts that you've like deep in the weeds like this that you found, but I
feel pretty good about it.
That conclusion. Yeah.
I feel pretty good about it as long as the offense doesn't just suck. But like in terms of the specific ways that they like to create offense and use players, I think it does fit pretty well with London. I don't know if it fits super well with Pitts, and people are going to not like that because they're just like, well, fantasy points at tight ends. Like we've seen it with Stefanski over and over. And it's like, I just don't think he's similar really at all to Njoku, like in a single way, other than they both are technically tight ends. So that's kind of where I'm at, is like, I think it does feel good for London and it could be good for Pitts. I just don't know if it's as natural of a fit. To me, with Pitts, it's going to have to kind of come down to how we see the role maybe adapt. All right. Ravens didn't use a ton of this under Todd Monken. They do have Declan Doyle coming in from Chicago. He was with Denver previously. We saw a lot of this in Chicago last year, so maybe we see this added to Zay Flowers. I think this is an area where he could do well. He had a very high separation score on these routes last year. I don't think that there's any... I don't want to act in any way like the role for Flowers like needs to be improved though, because he's been boosted in a huge way by all of the play action and all of the stuff that Monken's done. And then he also has had, big formations, very little target competition. Like I think we're pretty much seeing this player and his skill set maxed out in terms of production. Maybe he could get more work in the red zone, but like that's basically the only way that it could get better from a role standpoint, from what I can tell.
Yeah, just like, as you said, red zone usage, touchdown variance stuff, plus just pure drop back volume are always going to be the two biggest questions for Zay Flowers. But yeah, I think like legitimately very good player that has been maximized pretty well the last couple of years. So yeah, don't necessarily expect that to change with Doyle.
Yeah. The Bills kind of use these, like low-key use these a lot under Joe Brady. So above a 40% rate for both Shakir and Josh Palmer. Keon Coleman didn't get these very much, but that for whatever reason, they're insistent that he's an X receiver, and that continues to just not work at all. But yeah, I think we could see more of these for DJ Moore, or similar to last year. But again, I just don't know what to make of DJ Moore. Moving on to the Panthers, if you're good with that. Tetairoa McMillan really did well on these routes. These are his best. This is the best way to use him, in my opinion. And this is an area where we've seen Dave Canales really uses receivers a lot. You see a 45% rate for Jalen Coker here, with McMillan having a better separation score and a better win rate on these routes. He was productive on these routes. His yard per route runner was by far the highest on horizontally breaking routes among any route type charted by the Fantasy Points data suite. So I do think this is good for him. I mean, he's tough, man. Like he's tough on these routes where he was consistently getting open against all types of different coverages. I think he has a really good feel for zone, and he can create after the catch a little bit more than people realize. So getting these in breaking routes in particular, I think is really good for McMillan. I think they'll lean into that more and more.
Yeah. I remember this was a note that I had on just Dave Canales' wide receiver ones and X receivers is that like he used Mike Evans in this way a ton as well. And yeah, it did map on pretty well to McMillan. So that was good to see. And yeah, I would expect it to continue.
Here's the Bears, 40% rate for Luther Burden. Of course, was productive with it. Roma Dunze was kind of hyper-targeted on these routes last year, especially early in the season when he saw his first read rate really high. I think it was this type of a role, sort of similar to McMillan. I don't think he's as good as McMillan necessarily at that, but it was an area where Ben Johnson used him a lot. DJ Moore had the lowest involvement as an age-breaking route runner, and then also wasn't targeted all that often on those routes. Don't have much here. I think Luther Burden will eat on these routes.
Yeah, not a ton else to add here either.
Jamar was used more this way and was also hyper targeted, 34% target per route rate on horizontally breaking routes. I think he's just been so dominant down the field that's mostly how he was used early in his career. But I think continuing to unlock more and more of this is good for him, and that's why we saw his first retarget rate the highest it's ever been. If you need any reasons to draft Jamar Chase, I think we're like so spoiled at the top of drafts this year. It's really crazy. Like the top 4 or 5 profiles are all so freaking good. Are you drafting JSN above Jamar or Puka or Christian McCaffrey? Because
I'm drafting Puka. I should rephrase. I am ranking Puka above him. When I'm drafting best ball teams and you have to be lower on Jamar exposure to draft Puka ahead of him, I'm not doing that. I'm just drafting them in order. But when my rankings come out for managed redraft, if you're drafting one team, I will likely have Puka ahead unless something changes my mind between now and then.
Yeah, I have JSN behind all those guys, which is just, I don't know. It's such a crazy year at the top. Here's the Browns. Don't have much to add. Just wanted to show 43% rate for Judy. And he was decent on them. I don't know. Judy, some people are into Judy. I'm good.
Me too.
Here's the Cowboys. Not super high rates, but 33% in terms of route volume, but 33% target per route run rate and 3.7 yards per route run for George Pickens on these routes. 27% win rate. Just insane stuff. He's so good. And then Lamb coming in slightly behind him, which is really impressive because he was playing a lot of the season with a high ankle sprain. Really, really hyper targeted and effective on these routes. Broncos, 48% of Pat Bryant's routes. Mr. Michael Thomas, 2.0 here. It was really interesting to see him used this way because it wasn't exactly what he was in college. But I think we could see Jaylen Waddle used this way a lot, depending on how they feel he fits in. So like this is one of the most like player specific adaptations we've seen among the receiver rooms here so far, where it's like 48% of the routes for Pat Bryant, 37% of the routes for Courtland Sutton, only 29% of the routes for Troy Franklin, only 17% of the routes for Marvin Mims, who's basically just a screen or a deep ball type of guy for the Broncos. So I'm really curious what the role will be like for Waddle.
Yeah, agreed. I think this ties in well to kind of the Jaylen Waddle conversation we were having earlier, where I think he fits in well kind of on these short and intermediate routes, a lot of them ending up being, there's like a little bit of overlap there with vertical versus horizontal. So, yeah.
For Detroit, massive 47% horizontally breaking route rate for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Was really effective on those, of course, was hyper-targeted on those, no surprise. Saw it scaled back a little bit with Jameson Williams this year, which I thought was interesting. We'll see. This isn't something that Petzing has used a ton. Are you nervous about JMO with Petzing and just kind of how we've seen the wide receiver 2 get neglected in his offenses?
Yes, I am. I just think Sam Laporta is like the win. If you're picking like a winner in the passing game of Petzing, it's Sam Laporta to me. Right. Jameson Williams per game splits with Laporta active have been very bad for most of his career. I think the gap in ADP between those two is really weird. I don't think it's like at all clear that Jameson Williams is like the clear second option ahead of Laporta at any point. So I'm rather high on Laporta, rather low on JMO at cost.
Yeah. All right, Green Bay Packers. Man, we saw a ton of these in 2024. LaFleur really spammed horizontally breaking routes like more than any team. The rates were slightly down in 2025, but still a really high 47% rate for Romeo Doubs, which is interesting because I think people think of him as, sacrificial X, working the sideline, and he does have a lot of important catches on the sideline and does run a lot of his routes on the sideline. But also there's a lot of like deep in-breaking routes in this offense and the designs that LaFleur draws up to attack different areas and get these receivers in space. And these routes have been really effective. This is probably the least effective I've seen them over the past few years, with the one exception being Christian Watson. So 39% of Watson's routes were horizontally breaking, which is pretty much right in line with the rest of the receiver room. What's not in line is this massive 37% target per route run rate on these routes for 3.9 yards per route run. I think it's sort of similar to like Jameson Williams, where like he's very good in space getting going like this. I think he's maybe even a little bit of a better tackle breaker than JMO and can obviously stride out and create big plays. We saw Dontavian Wicks with a 37% target per route run rate on these types of routes over the past couple of seasons. Like Wicks and Dobbs have been the players who get a lot of these routes. So I do think that's going to transfer over. Some of that's going to transfer over depending on who is the outside receiver here that's kind of filling that role. I think it could be Watson. It could be Golden.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about Green Bay here because, that 3.89 yards per route run for Watson on the H-breaking routes is the highest rate in the league with a minimum of like 65 routes or something like that. Highest rate in the league. Dontavian Wicks, 12th best, just ahead of A.J. Brown on horizontally breaking routes last year. I mentioned that because, of course, Dontavian Wicks moves over to the Eagles with Sean Mannion, who has also spent the last 2 years in Green Bay. So, Mannion as the new play caller for the Eagles, I think is one of the most like intriguing places, just in terms of at the team level, what could change in terms of route design from last year. The Eagles were one of the most, one of the lowest rates of H-break routes last year, kind of combined with all the speculation about how this offense is going to look, that they're going to want to throw over the middle of the field more. They're drafting Mekhi Lemon. They're drafting Eli Stowers, like kind of building more of a receiving core that is meant to like attack the middle of the field, attack horizontally. I think that's pretty interesting to think about. Just overall, that could prove a more efficient approach for all the Eagles receivers. And to just think about, well, what's the route breakdown going to be here between a Dontavian Wicks, a Mekhi Lemon, that like their playing time? How is there going to be a rotation there? I think all that's one of the more interesting places to think about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. There's a number of things I want to hit on there. So I do think Dontavian Wicks is potentially interesting. Somebody's like completely free in Dynasty who might, he's proven to be able to get open and he might have a later career revitalization. I think that's realistic with the play caller here and the fit with Philly. I think Devontae Smith in general, like this is going to be a good thing for him to have more of these routes. His rate was extremely low last year. 31% is the rate for Smith. And then the other thing I wanted to hit on was A.J. Brown. So A.J. Brown had a 38% rate compared to 31% for Smith. So there maybe was something there that made them think that this was an area to focus on for him. I wanted to look at Stephon Diggs and the Patriots in general. Under Josh McDaniels, they used quite a bit of this. 44% rate for Diggs. And I do think there are some really interesting things to think about with AJ Brown, like other than like, I don't know, maybe it's not even worth it. Maybe it's just simply like AJ Brown's good, Drake May is good, this is going to be good. But like it was exceptional with Diggs last year in terms of all the per route stuff, all the per opportunity stuff. He was so efficient. And I think that AJ Brown potentially is even better. I meant to mention him earlier when we were looking at first read rates. I don't remember if I did or not. He was 42% first read target rate in 2024. So that's right up there with like the highest that we've ever seen. I mentioned, what was the Garrett Wilson rate? 44%, I think. Jackson Smith and Jig was like 45%. The Malik Neighbors rate in 2024 was like 44 or something like that. AJ Brown is just below that. And he averaged over 3 yards per route run in 2024. Like, we're just 1 year removed from that. And I think people kind of forget that. His rate last year was good too. He was wide receiver 8 in first read target rate at 35%. And so, as Ryan's researchers pointed out, that's one of the most important stats in terms of predicting future scoring at wide receiver. And then, the H break route stuff is just another thing on top of that. And I do think that we saw Drake May really focus on his first read a lot. I think this all just lines up really, really well for AJ Brown if he has anything left in the tank.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. And I was kind of resistant to him just like getting up into round 2 of drafts. But yeah, I think the more like specific types of things I look at, like you just explained, the more I'm kind of like, yeah, that's probably just right. He probably should be at least like a late round 2 pick.
All right, back to the team by team. The Texans used a ton of these routes last year, especially for Nico Collins, which I think makes a lot of sense. 45% of his routes were H-breaking routes, which is by far the highest that we've seen it. That was something I speculated could happen for him last year, and I'm excited to see it. He was targeted on 26% of these routes. I think he could be even better on this in year 2. I think having a lot of these other receivers around him who are competent receivers and potentially better than what they're running out at times last year. With the young guys here taking a step forward in year 2, Tank Dell maybe being healthy, that could even help open up more space in this offense for the horizontally breaking routes. The other guy is Jaden Higgins. Had a really, really high rate. 48% of his routes were horizontally breaking routes. He created separation on them too. Like, his separation score is just below Nico on these routes, which I think is interesting. This is somebody who is a big-bodied guy, and I think people think of as like a outside receiver archetype or whatever. But if you remember, like in the reception perception charting, Matt Harmon was like, he struggles against man coverage. This looks like somebody who kind of needs to be a like big slot type of player. And I think maybe the Texans' usage of Higgins in year 1 kind of indicates something similar. So I wanted to point out his rate, just one of the highest in the whole league. Colts. Definitely got some interesting stuff here on the Colts. So 39% rate for Pittman and Pierce, only a 35% rate for Josh Downs, which is weird. So Alec Pierce's rate I want to talk about first. It's gone up over the past few years, 39%. He's typically thought of as a vertically breaking player, which is where he's at his best and where he does most of his work. But this rate is pretty high, 39% for this type of a player. And then the other thing is he continues to be more and more involved on these routes. Not only is he running more of them, but his target per route run rate has risen. His target per route run rate on horizontally breaking routes has risen from 14% to 17% to 21% year over year. And he's been more and more effective. 0.85 yards per route run compared to 1.49 in 2024 and 2.23 on horizontally breaking routes in 2025. So could his role expand to more than just the downfield stuff? Maybe. Dan and I really, really liked his work when he was breaking back to the ball and like selling a vertical breaking route and then winning on those digs. And maybe Shane Steichen draws him more of this horizontal breaking stuff too. They've talked a lot about wanting to use him in more ways this year. They're going to double his targets, Ryan. Do you think we might see 160 targets from Alec Pierce?
I don't think we're seeing that, but I do think this is helpful context in terms of the Colts' optimism, just for him taking on more of like that Pittman-esque intermediate type of role. I was like pretty skeptical on that before seeing these numbers, but yeah, that's legitimately interesting. Maybe this has like a better chance to work in that way that they envisioned than I was giving it credit for.
I think Josh Downs is definitely a candidate to see more of these as well. If it's true that he's going to be out on the field on 2 receiver sets a lot more, like the Colts have told us he's going to be. So again, 39% rate for Pittman last year. He was used a lot. This has been a way that Steichen, although Steichen doesn't use these routes a ton, he has used quite a bit of these in terms of Pittman on the in-breaking and out-breaking routes within his route tree. And Downs over the past 3 years is wide receiver 13, wide receiver 19, and wide receiver 6 in separation score on horizontally breaking routes. And that's out of like 90 or 100 receivers. So those are very good scores to be in the top 20 every single year. So I do like that for him, the potential to take on more of this Pittman role. We're, of course, always excited about our boy Josh Downs. The Jaguars, you brought up the BTJ stuff. Here's the actual data. 34% for BTJ over the course of the full season, 44% for Parker Washington, 42% for Jacoby Myers. If you look at the Washington stats are just nuts. 3.3 yards per route run, 29% target per route run rate for Washington. I think this role is really, really good as long as Gladstone doesn't force Liam Cohen to do something he doesn't want to do, which I would be really surprised by given what we've seen from Liam Cohen. It kind of seems like he does what he wants to do. I think we're going to see another really, really fruitful role for Parker Washington. But like we brought up earlier in the show, there's a lot of factors here that could come into play. And if his route rate is down at all and he's not a full-time player, then that's definitely going to be something we feel for fantasy.
Can you look at Chris Godwin in 2024? Now I'm curious if this like perfectly maps on in this way too. Like if this just is like the Liam Cohen slot efficiency is actually just this that we're describing, or at least from like a different lens.
Yeah, sure.
I'm curious.
What I would say is I don't think that he used Godwin and Parker Washington the same way. I feel like Parker Washington was used a lot more down the field.
Yeah.
So like some of these horizontally breaking routes are like in breaking routes that were occurring a lot deeper than Godwin's routes. But let me look up the Bucks from 2024 real quick.
Yeah,
I do remember
Godwin was much heavier on like the screens and the design targets as well too. So maybe maybe the H break rate won't be as high. So yeah, you're right that they weren't like the same role, but I was just curious in terms of route design if there's a through line there at all, or in terms of the efficiency as well. But
I do remember digging into Tampa Bay's 2024 data in terms of how it might transfer over to Jacksonville and getting very excited about Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter because of the way that Godwin and Mike Evans dominated on these H-breaking routes. And so I just looked it up, and it was 51% route rate. 51% of Godwin's routes were horizontally breaking under Liam Cohen. It's a 7-game sample size, but yeah, 51% of his routes, and he was really, really good on them. And then like Evans had a 40% rate, and he had a 35% target per route run rate on those routes, which that was all sort of unusual for Evans in terms of historically how he's been used. The in-breaking stuff was really, really good for Tampa Bay. And while I do think it's a little bit different in terms of where it's occurring on the field for Parker Washington, it's kind of like a blend of the Mike Evans and Chris Godwin target depths. I think it's just really good. I think it's really good to have him unlocking the middle of the field. And I think that's an important part of this offense. That's what Liam Cohen wants. And that's something we've needed for Trevor for a long time. Trevor has just like not really been able to aggressively attack over the middle of the field in the way that I feel like his arm talent suggests that he could. And I think last year was the first time we saw that unlocked, where it's like, come on, trust it. You can do it. Chiefs are next. Yeah, not much to see here.
Yeah. Could we zoom in a little bit more too? We zoomed out at some point there. That was probably my fault.
Zoom in on this about here we go. Let's get a closer look at Marquise Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, Xavier Worthy. Good stuff. Raiders, probably not a whole lot more. I do think we're going to see a lot more of this with the Raiders. So you brought up the Eagles. The Raiders were the other offense that you thought could see a huge boost in this way. I remember in the first game of the season, Brock Bowers got a lot of these, and I got pretty psyched. And then it ended up being one of the lowest rates for any team was where the Raiders ended up over the course of the full season. So maybe we see more of these for Bowers. I think Jack Besh could do well on these routes. Even Naylor. I think he's not necessarily like some big route him up type of guy, but he definitely has a little bit of speed. So if you get him rolling on these over the middle types of targets, Naylor could create some big plays. We saw that last year with O'Connell.
Yeah. Do you want to just compare to the Seahawks? Sorry, I know we're jumping around, but maybe compare Raiders to Seahawks just with what Clint Kubiak did last year? Or I don't know. I'm not going to tell you how to run the show and what order to go in, but that was where I was immediately curious. So yeah, you see JSN up here at 41%, extremely efficient on these routes. Not to say JSN wasn't great on the vertically breaking downfield stuff too. But yeah, you can just see the rates are higher here. Cooper Kupp up at 45%. Obviously don't think that was really, I think the Cooper Kupp experiment pretty clearly failed last year in terms of, is he washed? How much does he have left in the tank? But yeah, that's legit interesting just in terms of the team's top 2 receivers. Could be a lot higher for a Kubiak offense on the Raiders than it was there last year.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the JSN thing. Let me see if I can do this. I want to pull up a tweet from last year and do a classic Beyond the Box Score here and just pat ourselves on the back a little bit. Check this out. We were all over this, right? I remember you and I talked about this. This is from the FFT newsletter, where it's like I really felt like this specific thing, the horizontally breaking routes, was going to be really important for Jackson Smith-Njigba. And so what I've got on the screen here is like a look at his low H-break route rate and how unusual it was for a receiver who scored as many points as he did in 2024. If you looked at like the top 10 receivers, he was by far the lowest rate. The only one who was close was Malik Neighbors. And I do think that's relevant when a receiver is able to have a really high target rate and be productive, even without some of this role catering type stuff that we like. With Neighbors, he's still in hell, but like with Jackson Smith-Njigba, he got out of it, and look what he could do, you know? And so like, that's worth knowing, I think, is like, what if they actually get out of hell and they can be good? Wouldn't that be cool? Yeah. So like last year, I think let's talk about Terry McLaurin. We are jumping all over the place at this point, but we're 2 hours into the show. Terry McLaurin is who stands out to me here, and maybe he's not as good as Malik Neighbors or Jackson Smith-Njigba, but he is very good. And he clearly has the lowest rate among receivers who were very good on a per opportunity basis. So 29% rate for McLaurin last year. If you look at receivers who averaged over 2 yards per route run, the only 2 who were even close to that low of a rate were Chris Olave at 32% and Devontae Smith at 31%. McLaurin's rate was 28.8%. And he's at his best as a vertical receiver. He's so good down the field. But I wonder if we might see more of these opportunities for him. David Blau has talked about wanting to move him around more and more. And just the fact that he was so productive last year, even with, the classic Cliff Kingsbury just stand over there and run down the field role, like is pretty encouraging. He's really good.
Yeah. That's any time that you can talk about just like a more diverse role or diverse route tree for a good player, that I get interested. So yeah, for sure. That's a really interesting note on McLaurin. Will be writing that down, making sure I hit on that in the play caller article. I still do have to write up the Commanders. They're last in the alphabet. So that's another good note for me. So the 2 hours was worth it.
Good stuff. Well, we already knocked him out here. So we're working our way through the alphabet. We have arrived at the Los Angeles Rams. Of course, you see really high rates here, even for like Devontae Adams, who is thought of as like a downfield receiver for sure. A 43% rate here for him. Massive separation score. He was very good on these routes. Sean McVay is very good at creating opportunities to get his players in space for sure. And that's encouraging for all these. McShanahan, did I see you added it's now McShanahanian? Is that how you're saying it now? Because that's just, I don't know. That feels like we're getting a little bold here. We're getting get out of our skis here. McShanahanian? You expect people to remember that?
I mean, you need that's just like a.
Dan
like
Schneier's never going to say that right.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I honestly don't listen to me on what the like phraseology is here. I'm pretty. I stole this from Rich Rebar like 2 years ago. It's not so. I think I'm just like more shameless in always saying the word McShanahan and expecting people to understand it. So it's whatever he says it is what it is what I would say.
Yeah. So maybe whether that's Zach Robinson or one of these brand new play callers, like there's definitely some interesting angles to think about here. Because that's kind of a staple of these playbooks for the most part. These guys who come from the McVay or Shanahan trees. I think particularly McVay. Here's the Dolphins. Speaking of such things, 41% rate for Jaylen Waddle, 41% rate for Malik Washington. Not really Tyreek's thing, generally speaking. And at times we've seen Waddle's rate kind of low too. But it was good last year. And I think that's interesting for Ladd. So I don't think Ladd's probably going to have the freaking 50% rate that he had last year, but he wasn't targeted on very many of these routes, McConkey. Whereas like Waddle was kind of hyper targeted, 29% target per route run rate on these routes. And we saw that not in 2024, but in 2023, it was also a 29% target per route run rate for Waddle on these horizontally breaking routes. So just more reasons for optimism around Ladd and his new coach. The Vikings, 42% rate for Justin Jefferson is good. That's one of the highest rates that we've seen for him. I think they've later in his career found more and more ways to get him in space, whether that's pre-snap motion or some of the route designs. I think Jordan Addison and having more field stretching threats helps that too. So I love that. His first 3 target rate was really high last year. Just across the board, it was a really dominant season for him in terms of target shares and everything. Part of that maybe had to do with that as a missing time. But I think it's possible we could see a bounce back from Jefferson here.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think I'm higher on Jefferson than you are. So nothing against that.
Saints don't use this much, which I think we could. I think when they do it, it's really good. So yeah, 28% target per route run rate on Olave on these horizontally breaking routes. Like that's something Dan and I have talked about. Is like Shuck really loves ripping these out, breaking throws with anticipation, and that's mostly Olave who's benefiting from that. I think Jordan Tyson is somebody who could benefit from horizontally breaking routes, but that it isn't. It's unusually low rates for Kellen Moore, but I think it's possible that we could see, not to the same extent as the Cowboys. Where is it? But it's possible we could see, here we go, the Saints kind of creep up, further north on this chart, similar to the Cowboys, where they don't use it at a high rate, but when they do use it, it's very efficient and it's targeted at a high rate.
Yeah, I vibe with that 100%.
My million tabs are killing me right now. Giants don't use it much. Don't expect it to be used much going forward. Yeah, I don't know. Do you think Wan'Dale Robinson is worth talking about or drafting? Like he's the other one who looks really weird. If you look at like targets per out run and yards per out run, and then first downs per out run are very low. He played on the Giants. Also, I don't think he's a significantly above replacement level type of player. So I think that makes sense, basically, is my takeaway.
Yeah, worth drafting. I don't know, like in terms of what I just see him as kind of like Jacoby Myers, but with less target competition on a worse offense. I don't know. That's way too many qualifiers. But yeah, I try not to give too much thought to Wan'Dale Robinson. I occasionally have stress dreams about how he's just gonna vacuum up hundreds and hundreds of targets like he kind of always has with Dayball, and that maybe that's something like we should think about or pay attention to. But in terms of like, are you going to be really mad if you pass over him in your managed redraft league? I don't think so. This is way more like best ball brain stuff to me.
Yeah. Malik Neighbors only a 32% rate on these again. So maybe his rate comes up a little bit more under a new regime here. 43% rate for Garrett Wilson. Love that. 40% for AD Mitchell. I think that's a good way to use Garrett Wilson. So hopefully the new coaching staff looks at what happened last year with Wilson finally being able to see his target rates like unlocked at an elite level and kind of copy some of that. But don't know if that hope is going to do us much good. Sometimes hoping is just setting yourself up for failure, and that's often the case for anything Jets related. Steelers, another team that will be under a new coach. Do you have any Mike McCarthy related thoughts here? Low rates for the Steelers across the board.
I don't know off the top of my head what it would have looked like for him with the Cowboys in 2021 through 2024. My biggest Mike McCarthy thought is he has always been very high pass rate inside the 10-yard line at the goal line. Aaron Rodgers also has been every single year of his career, except for when he played under Arthur Smith, basically. So I do think and now he has 2 6'4" wide receivers. Like we could just get one of these random like 12 plus touchdown seasons from a Metcalf or a Pittman. And I could, if it's Metcalf, I'm going to be sitting here like super mad about it. I'm going to be the nerd screaming about the touchdown variance. If it's DK Metcalf, if it's Pittman, I'll feel happy and feel like I'll look smart for it, basically. But yeah, it could be either one of them or both of them. Like I wouldn't be that shocked if we just get that type of outcome in the red zone for one of them.
Yeah,
but that's pretty far afield from the H break route stuff. Yeah, I don't have a take there really.
Okay, go to Dan Schneier for your Pittsburgh Steelers related fantasy football takes. I don't have any. San Francisco 49ers obviously use these a lot, not so much on the X receiver type of players. So like last year, that was more Kendrick Bourne and Demarcus Robinson. But Pearsall filled that role some and actually did still have a pretty high rate. So I think it might be a stylistic thing. Like, do you have Ayuk data off the top? I feel like I remember it not being that high in some of the Ayuk seasons where he's more of a vertical receiver, but still we saw elite efficiency produced within that role. So I don't want to nitpick here, but yeah, really high rate for Pearsall. And I think he was really good on those routes. And so I think Evans coming in potentially helps him. I'm sure his target rates will probably be, well, I don't know. His first retarget rate will probably be a lot lower. But I think these Ayuk rates are still pretty high, 43% in 2023. Awesome. Yeah. So yeah, love that for Evans. Obviously playing for Shanahan is great. Pearsall, 26% target per route run rate, 2.5 yards per route run on these routes with ridiculous separation scores and win rates. The dude treads when he's healthy. He gets open.
Yeah, that's pretty fun. Okay, we're improving my opinion of Ricky Pearsall on 2 hours into this podcast. Glad we could get here.
He's nuts, man. Watch the dude. Like
pretty. Yeah, I know. I get it when you watch him for sure. I've just been pretty dismissive in terms of like. This is actually, you're the one that made this comparison, but to me, it's like a way worse version of early career Christian Watson, where we haven't actually gotten like the stretches of super good raw production like we did from Watson at the end of his rookie year. But that I do think you're right to make the comparison in terms of, like he's super good, super efficient generally when he's been on the field healthy.
If you want a very, very cheap version of Lad McConkey, it's Ricky Pearsall.
Yeah, I don't hate that take at all.
Here are the Seahawks. 41% rate for JSN. I think, as we just saw with San Francisco, there's a good chance that we're going to see another high rate here in a fairly similar role, hopefully. The Bucks, 44% rate for Emeka Egbuka. Love that. High rates across the board. I think that's the way to use them. I love that Zach Robinson says him and Liam Cohen talk every single day. I'm excited to see this offense hopefully kind of back to the 2024 form, or at least like 70 or 80% of it, please. That'd be great.
Yeah, Zach Robinson is kind of you can go to the next team as I'm going on this rant. It's not that specific to any player or data, but Zach Robinson is like, when you look at a lot of the underlying play caller data, so like during snap motion, for example, he's one of the highest in the league over the past few years. The H break route stuff, like a lot of these like super in the weeds play calling things look very, very good for him. And so, yeah, it's at least interesting to say, okay, Baker Mayfield, pretty clearly at least like the highest ceiling quarterback that we're going to have seen him work with, an offense that's a little bit more built to pass the ball. Like there's like some legit interesting stuff there that does make me. Maybe I'm just talking myself more into Emeka Egbuka as we go. It's just very unclear to me like how the target share and everything is getting divvied up with the Bucks and the route share and everything. It's very ambiguous to me.
Definitely check out this episode with Reeves, Transformative Coaching Changes. We talked about all this with Robinson. There's a lot of ways where he on paper looks really good. And I think he'll hopefully be like more freed up than we've ever really seen him in terms of quarterback play. He seems pretty excited about working with Baker Mayfield, and I think that makes a lot of sense given what he's had to work with. Okay, let's wrap up here with the Titans. Important that we get this in. What are your takeaways here, Ryan?
Oh my God.
46% rate for Calvin Ridley, 27% target per route run rate on these routes. No, I don't know. I got nothing here.
Yeah, me either. The Titans are another team I haven't written up yet for play callers, and that's gonna be a short blurb, I think. Even with Brian Daboll, I ain't got that much, man.
Yeah, I guess, that's the takeaways. Daboll didn't use these very much in New York, even when he had Malik Neighbors, who seems like he could be one of the most dangerous players in the whole freaking league on these types of routes. So I don't know. You'll probably get a lot of Wan'Dale. I think Cardinal Tate's freaking awesome. I don't really know if he's going to have a very fantasy-friendly game, especially as a rookie. That's kind of where I'm at with the Titans.
It's basically where I'm at as well, that Wan'Dale Robinson is just like the black hole for which any of the potentially like more interesting fantasy takes just kind of get sucked inside of with every Wan'Dale Robinson target.
Yep. All right, Ryan, thank you so much for being here for 2 hours. We've got a lot more Ryan Heath coming up on the program, so stay tuned. Subscribe if you have not already. Beyond the Box Score, we got a lot of good stuff coming your way. Ryan, I really appreciate you helping us out, and we have completed 1 month of work together, you and I, with preparing the cheat codes for the people. That's what they need. So tell them where they can find more of your work, what's coming up as well on Fantasy Points Data. Lots of exciting stuff there, and we'll get out of here.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter to keep up with all my work at RyanJ_Heath. On the site, fantasypoints.com, that's where you'll find all of my written work. Coming up after the 4th of July, I'm going to have a massive breakdown of every single new play caller in the NFL and what it means for fantasy. Always a really fun article to write that I've referred to a few times throughout this show. So yeah, once that's out in a week or two from now, make sure you go take a look at that. And we are on YouTube, fantasypoints.com, or youtube.com/fantasypoints. Go subscribe. I'm on there every Monday morning with Graham Barfield now. It's been a ton of fun digging into some nerdy topics over there too. So yeah, go check it out. Go subscribe. And you are muted, Jacob.
So close. Check it out. Fantasy Points. They've got all the YouTube channels. We are subscribed already here Beyond the Box Score. Love the team over at Fantasy Points Data, helping us out with the good information, all the charting and everything, and then also these analysts who help us out here on Beyond the Box Score, put together these shows. Got Scott Barrett coming on soon. Very excited for that. But yeah, that's everything. Check out the player profiles we're putting out. Tetairoa McMillan coming up for you soon. Emeka Egbuka. We already put out Luther Burden if you want to find that right now. We're focused more on the wide receiver position. I already said like Dave Richards going to be on. I think we're going to talk about 9 players that we're having a really hard time ranking, and like 7 of them are receivers or something. Like I said at some point in the show, like after the first 11 or 12 receivers, it is really hard to make sense of these players. So excited to get Dave's perspective on that. But that's all for us. Thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging out in the live chat. Appreciate all y'all. I'll see you at the next episode.